Hello to all, and welcome to an episode of our Well-Being at Work podcast. My name is Rob Gould, and I am the VP of Student and Canadian Business Solutions at Workplace Options. I'm excited today to be joined by a great panel of experts for the CEO Roundtable on diversity, equity, and inclusion. With us today is Donald Thompson, EY Entrepreneur of the Year 2023 Southeast Award winner. Don is a globally respected and sought-after business leader with a proven track record of success in growing firms. As a CEO, speaker, investor, advisor, entrepreneur, and executive coach, Don brings a wealth of experience and expertise to any organization. Don is a certified diversity executive, CDE, and CEO and co-founder of the Diversity Movement, the creators of TDM Library. He is passionate about driving cultural transformation and delivering solid returns for employees and shareholders. Welcome, Don.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
We're also joined today by Guillaume Deybach, CEO at MSH Americas. With extensive management experience spanning over 20 years, he brings valuable leadership to MSH, a company providing healthcare protection to the globally mobile. Prior to his role, Guillaume served as the president and CEO of organizations like GeoBlue, also known as Blue Cross Blue Shield Global, and Europe Assistance with North America, transforming the companies and growing revenue organically and through acquisition. Welcome, Guillaume.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks for having me.
And last, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Robin Ingle. Robin is the CEO and founder of Novus Health, Ingle Health, and Ingle International, among many other companies. With over 40 years of international experience, Robin is a global specialist in providing specialized travel health solutions for adventurers, international students, snowbirds, special risk, and worldwide travelers. Good to have you with us, Robin.
Thank you, Rob.
And welcome to all our listeners once again, and we're going to dive right into the topic with our very first question. Gentlemen, how do you define diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what does it mean to you? Don, why don't you take a lead on this question?
Sure, and one that really is top of mind these days because there's a lot of kind of narrative around what DEI means. Very simply, diversity, when we think at the differences that we have, it can be skill-based, right? It can be geography. But what you're trying to figure out is how do you build a team that has different points of view, different perspectives, different life experiences. When you think about equity, you think about how do you create a personalized work experience where everyone can succeed. A very simple example is if somebody needs to prepare differently for meetings, sending out an agenda before the meeting allows people that can learn on the fly, or somebody that's needs a little bit more time to prepare. Inclusion is the action space to me. It's who do you ask for information? Who do you bring to the table? Who do you listen to? What are the promotion paths within an organization? So diversity, equity, and inclusion in a nutshell is how do you bring different voices, different personalities to bear on the business challenges that you have.
Thank you, Don. Guillaume, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, diversity speaks to who's in your workforce. Equity really ensures that people are treated fairly, and inclusion means that all voices in your organization are heard. So for us at MSH America, what DEI means is really a stronger team that is better equipped and more agile to respond to the challenges we face every day. It also means that our customers have someone that they can relate to. Our customers happen to be really diverse themselves. They can be international students, expatriates, Canadian travelers, and having a diverse workforce ourselves help us develop greater understanding and empathy for our customers. And finally, diversity, equity, and inclusion means our ability as an organization to attract and retain top talents.
Excellent. Thank you for that thoughtful answer. Robin, last word on this question to you.
I really like what Don said, and for me, that's an eye-opener for something that I've done naturally for the last 46 years, just because the way I was brought up was in a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-generational and gender-based group. So, I had male and female strong presence in business development. I had, part of my life growing up in Jamaica, and then at the same time being with different people with different religious backgrounds, that made it powerful. That showed how you can actually get innovation. And I like what Don said about those different views coming in, because to make a business, to make a country, to make a society strong, you have to listen to others and you have to bring them into that conversation. And I grew up that way, so it became more natural for me, but I think that has made the businesses that I've been involved in more powerful, and be able to move them into different countries, into different areas with different types of people, and not feel like you're coming in as an interloper. You're not. You're part of the group as you're coming in.
I think that's going to be a big thrust of today's recording, and we're going to get to that a little bit later on. Moving forward to the next question, Guillaume, what role do leaders play in shaping DEI within an organization?
Well, like anything that has to do with culture and corporate culture, and DEI is certainly key to that. It starts at the leadership level. So it's really up to your leaders to embody those DEI values and inspire, motivate people to follow them. If your leadership team is not buying into the DEI initiative, it will certainly fail in any organization. Because people ultimately want to see, yes, a diverse workforce, but they also want to see a diverse leadership team. And that's where sometimes it doesn't work, because if the leadership team is not representative of the employee base, then it sends a message that, that leadership group is an exclusionary group, and it's not really reflecting that inclusion culture that you're seeking. So it really starts with the leadership team.
Thank you, Guillaume. Robin, same question. And with your experience heading up multiple companies, you must have different experiences with the different leaders that are running your companies. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, I actually agree with Guillaume here too, is, it has to show within your structure of your organization, you have to be able to show that you are accepting of others in decision-making positions. And it's funny, and I have an example of what I gave you. I sold a family company back in 1998, and the senior executives that were brought in to the newly revised company, what was interesting is they were all white men, but there was something that bonded them together. They were all engineers. They all had this steel ring on, and it was funny. When I came back into the business to advise them on something a year later, a lot of these senior positions were made up of people that they knew, that they went to school with, that were part of their group. And I think that's part of the problem with corporations is you get people and you bring them in and you believe they're going to do it, but you have to look beyond that. You have to look at how you're going to help your stakeholders. Do you represent your stakeholders? Do you represent the consumer that you're working with or the citizens in your area? And that's a big mistake I think people do, because they feel more comfortable around who they know.
Thank you. Don, same question to you. And in your role as an advisor, you must have worked with multiple organizations, multiple leaders. Can you share some insights from your experience?
Yeah, and absolutely, because it's also types of leaders, but also size and types of businesses that really affect how DEI fits into the landscape. The one thing that I recommend to the C-suite is you have to be the behaviors that you want to see duplicated. And so you can't just put out edicts or a press release. You have to decide if inclusive language matters to you and your organization. So that means, are you really learning how to say everyone versus you guys? You really have to learn, if you're in the technology business, are you using person hours or man hours? You have to decide in the simple presentations of your daily work activities if DEI matters in how the business is going to grow. Because independent of the training, independent of the literature people look at or the courses they go to, people are going to try to emulate those people that are moving ahead in the organization. And that usually starts with the C-suite. So if the leaders decide that they're going to change who they listen to for innovation, if they're going to change the way mentoring and sponsorship is done, that example accelerates DEI through the organization. So to your question, it is all about how the C-suite perceives and acts upon DEI to really get things done.
Excellent. Thank you for that. As CEOs, what is the ROI, return on investment, in embracing DEI within the organization? Rob, I'm going to turn this over to you. And I know in my experience, I've heard often that, this is another cost. It's something that's going to be expensive for us. It's another line item that we have to consider. Can you talk about the ROI of DEI?
Yeah, and I guess what Don was saying is very important too. It's the size of the organization and the type of organization. A lot of times when you get a public organization that has shares in a public arena, they worry too much about their quarterly reports and they forget about their investment that they have to put into the social construct that's there. And I've seen huge benefits from having a very diverse, equitable organization that is able to contribute at all levels and help bring people up who are just starting out with the company, and making sure that you have the managers so they are a combination of being, and it's funny, I've used martial arts terms because of my background, and I say sometimes you have to have a closed fist and an open hand. You have to be fair, but you have to be determined and you have to go forward. But you also have to come back and instruct managers. It doesn't mean they've been taught properly either. If you're the CEO, you've got to come back and say, do we have the ability to explain to them why they need to progress in a certain way? And it's not all about giving somebody an easy break. It's about, how do you want to make this a better company? How do you want to make this a better culture within this company? I think that's the important part, because the return is huge. Customers enjoy it. You get a better product. You get better services.
Thank you, Robin. Don, over to you with that question. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the ROI of DEI in your experience?
Yeah, I'll give one metric. 70% of job seekers look at the DEI footprint of organizations they choose to work in, right? So that's number one when we're thinking about the talent wars. The other thing that is critically important is when you think about retention, right? The behavior, the relationship between team members and their managers is the most important connectivity to culture in an organization. So if we don't train our people leaders, we're going to have more of a revolving door inside the business. I was working with a very large organization. I won't name drop, but they saw a 10% increase in their sales deals closing when they had a heterogeneous sales team. Because what we're doing is we have to think about the way DEI shows itself in the work that we're doing. A client of ours, Fresh Market, has 10,000 employees. 8,000 of those employees are frontline workers in the retail establishment. So that means that the care that they show the employees directly translates to the client service that they deliver in the store. And the more people feel engaged in the store, the more they buy in that retail establishment, the more that they come back. So those are a couple of elements to where we see diversity, equity, inclusion being directly linked to how the business operates.
So clearly, this is empirical data that reflects a true value proposition for organizations that adopt DEI. It's not just fluff.
It's not just fluff. The thing I'll say also that's really, really important is that most of the times DEI is driven from a social justice construct. And that's why business leaders who are not measured that way don't get it. When DEI is positioned as a way that you can make more money, save money, or reduce your liability, your risk, now all of a sudden you're having a C-level conversation that can get into the mind of the C-level leader, because it's how they're compensated. It's how they were raised. It's how they're measured. And so a lot of times with DEI, we try to portray the goodness where we have to portray the goodness with the gold. And when you portray the goodness with the gold, then we can have a conversation at the C-level.
Love that. Goodness with the gold. Guillaume, your thoughts on ROI and goodness with the gold?
I totally agree with fellow podcasters. I mean, DEI is not just the right thing to do on a humanistic point of view. It's the smart thing to do for your business. And think about it. When you think about diversity in your staff brings diverse thinking and different perspective into your organization, and thus more creative solutions to improve your business, your product, your services. When you think about equity, it ensures that each person can achieve their full potential. And when people can achieve their full potential, they just contribute more to your team and your business ultimately. And finally, when you talk about inclusion, what is inclusion? It's about creating a work environment where people are not afraid, they're encouraged to express their opinions, their thoughts. And you never know in a business where your next best idea is going to come from. It could be from a frontline worker of a certain background. It could be the confrontation of perspective and ideas that is going to enrich the products and the business that you deliver. So really, it's not just the right thing to do. It's the best thing to do for your business.
Thank you very much. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'd like to hear from all of you about instances, if you have any, where there has been resistance to the implementation of a DEI strategy within an organization. And if so, what the resistance was and how did you navigate that? How did you deal with that? Don, I'd like you to start with this one.
Yeah, this is kind of my forte. I hear a lot of this a lot, but it's good. So one thing that I will say is when I hear resistance, I try to teach our team that resistance isn't negative on its face. Sometimes people simply don't know how to articulate what they don't understand, number one. The second thing is most people are or want to be thought of as rational actors. So therefore, when I hit resistance, I want to break things down to a common denominator where we agree. For example, there's a strongly Christian business leader that I was working with on an executive team, and they were having really significant heartburn over the LGBTQ related issues in the discussion. And they felt like they were being forced to change their religious belief. And so we had a discussion and said, wait a minute, you're in a financial institution, right? Do you want to take advantage of the $1.4 trillion in buying power of the LGBTQ community? He said, absolutely, I want to do that. Do you want people of all backgrounds, all sexual orientations, right, to feel comfortable and safe in your organization? He said, yes, I absolutely want to do that. So after we went through 3 or 4 different things, what we determined is that the objective of DEI is not to change his religious point of view, but to make him a better leader, to serve the clients better, and to make sure that the organization represented goodwill to all their stakeholders. But a lot of times DEI isn't explained in a manner where people feel comfortable asking those questions. Because we created a space to where that resistance or dissent was welcomed, we then could address it. And that is very, very important when you're dealing in DEI situations and dealing in resistance.
What a powerful example. Thank you for sharing that. Guillaume, how about yourself? Have you encountered any resistance when implementing DEI?
Well, I think for us, building a business case around the DEI strategy was, I would say, fairly straightforward because we started from the notion that successful companies have highly engaged workforce and nobody can really challenge that. And then we continued with the notion that, well, companies that do embrace DEI have actually more engaged workforce than others. So the demonstration was pretty straightforward and tying, I would say, DEI initiatives to our engagement efforts was really the key to gain support in our company. And so when we announced that we were making DEI part of our focus on our strategic plans, it was really well received. So I wouldn't say we really faced resistance. Certainly there were people that didn't fully understand DEI, didn't fully see the value it could bring to the organization. But as they began to understand what we were doing and see the value, I guess they understood and became supporters.
So fair to say that you stayed the line, you believed in the process and had faith that people would eventually see the value in what you were doing. Is that a fair comment?
That's right.
Perfect. Robin, last word on this question to you.
I think the common theme in both responses before me was education. Education, helping that individual get to the decision that they need to make. And they're the ones that have to make it. But education is always very important. And that's something as a leader you need to do with staff and with managers. You have to educate. And sometimes that's education about the wider world. You know, they may have a very small view of the world. They need a bigger view. And I can tell you the one thing I've known from working almost everywhere in the world and being with lots of different people, that there are common themes in our human existence that we forget about sometimes. And those common themes are wanting to be safe, wanting to be healthy, wanting to have food, wanting to have our children have hope. You know, those are common themes throughout. And it doesn't matter what kind of category you're in. That is part of who you are. And I think if we forget that sometimes because we always look at this casing we put around ourselves. And really, that's the common piece. And if we can educate everyone to be a little bit better, I think it gives us a stronger workforce. It gives us a stronger society. And they are unified. And I think people forget that. You know, the society around the business is very key to the business itself.
Well said. I think it hits on the idea that we all have more in common than we have different. And sometimes we all need to be reminded about that. Perfect segue. Thank you for my next question. Myself having the opportunity and good fortune to have lived abroad and lived in another culture, I can appreciate globally different perspectives on a variety of topics. When it comes to DEI, how do you approach DEI from that global perspective? Don, please start with that.
You know, it goes back to those commonalities, right? Because in certain geographies, right, diversity, equity, inclusion is still somewhat foreign, right? We're still talking about gender, right, relative to equality in the workplace. For some countries and locales, there are very stringent and very significant penalties if someone is in the LGBTQ community. So what you have to do when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion globally is you have to not look from a U.S. lens out, which a lot of times we're guilty of doing. Mm-hmm. You have to look from that geography and their point of view to the rest of the world so that you can use examples, language, and training that meets the needs of that organization's geography component. And then you can start mapping back to maybe a U.S.-led headquartered business. But you have to give people that sense that you understand where and who they are first before you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion from your lens. And that is, I think, a failing, quite frankly, of a lot of those of us that are U.S.-based. And because we naturally, a little bit of U.S. arrogance sometimes, we look at the rest of the world from the U.S. point of view versus looking at it from that pinnacle of where that geography sits. And once you do that, what you'll find are the things that move the needle, map back to what was just said by Robin, is those common themes of our human existence. And that's how you have to think about global DEI, right? Because that gives us a starting point that everybody can unify around, and then we can work the specifics about the geography.
Awesome. Outstanding. Thank you. Guillaume, over to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because the company MSH Americas that I've got the privilege to lead is employing around 250 employees in Canada, but we're also part of a multinational group which is headquartered in France and employing more than 5,000 employees across different continents. And so as a global company, we're working with different business units that have varying degrees of DEI in their workplace. And keep in mind that some of our offices are in countries where DEI is a rather mature topic, like we in North America. But we also work and have offices in countries where DEI is a very new concept, if it doesn't exist at all. So certainly at a group level, there's not been a one-size-fits-all approach to say like, okay, that's the way we work, and let's impose our model on all companies wherever they might be, as much as we created a forum of our HR leaders, really looking at what were the best practices that they had in different countries, and what were also the regulation and the culture and what could be done, and really share those best practices to appropriate them and make sure that we were moving in the right direction. But it's a very interesting, because I don't think, to Don's point, we can impose a Western point of view on DEI in every single country.
Thank you for sharing that. Robin, over to you. From a global perspective, in your experience, how have you approached DEI?
Well, exactly like it's been said, is that if you are a global entrepreneur, you have to be a chameleon. You have to be knowledgeable. You have to understand. And one thing that also permeates our human existence is our history. And I can tell you, if you know a little bit about the background of who you're with, from where they started and where they came from, it helps you assimilate better, and it helps you connect. So you're not using a Western view. You're using more of a globalized view, and you're coming in and working with them. And I can give some key examples. You know, in December, I was in Riyadh at a conference, speaking at a conference, and Saudi gets blamed for having a closed culture, but it has a very strict culture. And because it's trying to change on their 2030 plan, what's interesting is that they have to develop, and they're doing travel and tourism. They've spent $1 trillion already on travel and tourism. They have to bring women into the workforce, and they're doing that. The women are demanding it also. They have to be more open. They have to relax some of their rules. They have to realize that Islam is not a closed religion. It actually is an inclusive religion. In the past, it was one of the most inclusive. Christianity was closed. Now you see Christianity is being open. So we go through these different kinds of modes, and we have to understand that. You can go in, but you have to go in with an understanding that you're dealing with some people that they have a right to exist who they are, and you want to educate, you want to help, and you want to listen too at the same time. I think listening is a big thing. One of the points I always make when I'm talking to universities and college students is that because we're dealing in travel, and so is Guillaume, is that the real risk to travel is not to travel. Because when we travel, we see we're more similar than we are different. And that's something you want to walk them through so they understand that, right? Because if you live in your own little town and you haven't left there, you're going to have a myopic point of view. You want to have it a little bit bigger.
Agreed. I mean, I always grew up hearing that travel, true travel, not necessarily vacation, but travel was the best form of education. I think that speaks to what you just said. Moving ahead, the next question asks, what drew you to DEI, and when did you start this journey of DEI? Guillaume, can you respond?
Sure. So I joined myself for MSH America at a time of change. I mean, the company had gone through a merger and had two companies in Canada having rather different corporate culture. So as any new leader with our executive team, we went through, the usual SWOT analysis and initiated several surveys, including an employee engagement survey, just to better understand what were the strengths we had, but also some of the challenges. And one thing we realized through those surveys was both of our companies' entities had highly diverse workforces. And interestingly enough, our staff was really valuing that characteristic of our company. So we really felt that we had, beyond my personal belief, that we had an asset that we could leverage. And we also happen to have like an HR leader who was motivated and capable to champion the DEI initiative, which is a key aspect. So it was really a great time for us to make improvement and invest in those initiatives. And the results actually have been pretty impressive, because just to give you a couple of numbers of where we are as an organization, I mean, today we have 63% of our staff, 62% of our managers, and 33% of our executives that are BIPOC. When you look at women, I mean, we have 67% of our staff, 62% of the managers, and 50% of the executives that are women. Even on our board, which is usually the toughest one, we have 2/3 of our board directors that are women and 1/3 that are BIPOC. So overall, and even when we go to other things like gender, 16% of our staff identify as LGBTQ+. And overall, we employ 18 different nationalities in the company, speaking 20 different languages. So we've really started from an asset and we've further developed it. But it's really something we're really proud of. And we know as well that the journey is only started, because we started that journey a few years ago, and we know that there is so much room for continued progress. But that's you've got to start it and put the efforts into it.
Based on what you've just shared, you clearly are walking the walk and not just talking the talk. Those are some pretty impressive numbers, in my opinion. Don, over to you.
Yeah, what drew me to DEI? So prior to the diversity movement, I was the CEO of a digital brand agency. And during that time, during those couple of years, a lot of our enterprise clients were asking us to upgrade their website. How could they change their language to attract more multicultural talent, and also their audience segmentation to grow their market share? And so obviously, right, if they would pay me money, we will help them with things to do that. But I would ask these leaders, do you want to think about DEI from the inside out so that your efforts are more authentic and more lasting? And the answer was yes, but we don't know where to start, because we don't have anyone that can help us that understands the business dynamics that we're facing. Yes, but is this something that can apply to our C-suite, our middle management, and our team members? And again, where do we start? So for me, as an entrepreneur, I saw an opportunity. The distance between those that were pursuing DEI purely from a social justice perspective, which is good and necessary, but I saw a window of opportunity for an organization that created the linkage between diversity, equity, inclusion, and how to grow a better business. And that's what drew us to the cause, if you will. Our cause is mission-based, but we're a for-profit business. So our goal is year over year is we want to see better retention numbers within the clients that we work with. We want to see those that have hired us from the CMO level, that they've grown their audiences and they've seen their revenue grow. We want to see that the talent acquisition team is looking at more and different universities. So back to the measurement of ROI, we got into this space because we felt like there was a business linkage opportunity, and it's one of the things that creates some uniqueness for us. But that was the driver.
Thank you, Don. Robin?
Well, that's interesting. I think I started this coming out of the womb. My parents were a great example. My mother emigrated from Finland, Scandinavian. My father grew up in Canada on a farm. But it seems that both of them didn't have a barrier in life. And they did lots of things together, and they built lots of businesses. And we had, right from growing up, I had, obviously I grew up in a Protestant Christian house, but we had Catholic priests and nuns visiting. We had Buddhist monks. We went to synagogue. We went to a temple. I knew these things. Education was very valuable for us to learn. There was an opportunity in Jamaica. My father went to Jamaica, had an insurance company. I grew up around people that were Black and, different culture, different background, and nothing was different. Nothing was alien. So that really, I think, helped me. And then leveraging off of what Dawn had said is when I got into business, I saw there's a huge opportunity that's being missed. Regular companies were not looking at how to include people. They were trying to segregate and move people in a different direction. You're going, that's not the world. So there's a huge economic benefit. And then when I got into the security business, this is the 80s and 90s, I saw that there was a real issue that affected our security as a human population. If you isolate people, if you abandon people, if you remove them from being included, then you create a situation where you have this barrier. And that barrier just means people want to climb over it. So you better be smarter and you got to think. And training companies to be a little bit better about the communities they're in. Mining companies, when they go in and they think that they're going to go and they're going to take all the gold out of the ground, but they're not going to take care of the community around it, that's wrong. So you try to train them, and you go back to what we've all been talking about, educate them, get them to understand there's also a psychological, and this comes back to WPO, there's a psychological need for us to be inclusive. There's a huge mental health benefit in being more diverse in your surroundings, not being afraid of other people. Knocking those barriers down makes a big difference.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things that attracted me to WPO was their approach about DE&I and making people from all walks of life feel comfortable. We are a multinational company. We have offices located all over the world, and we celebrate our differences and learn from each other. And it's a powerful, powerful thing to be a part of. And listening to all three of you, it strikes me that it just seems so easy, and it seems like not only the right thing to do, but from a business perspective, it's the right thing to do. So it makes me scratch my head, which also is a segue to the next question. Guillaume, I'm going to ask you first. What is the hesitation for some organizations to embrace DE&I?
Well, I guess there is I'm sure there is many different reasons, but two of them that I can think of. One is a general lack of commitment or resources for some organization. Because in order to do DEI well, it's got to be intentional. It's got to be organized. You've got to put commitment from start to finish from your leadership. You've got to put some resources, and some of those things were pretty hard to focus on for some leadership teams, and certainly in the past few years, pandemic didn't help as companies were probably prioritizing other things. But I think the second main hesitation that I can see, and that's probably a more difficult one, it's what I would call the status quo bias. And it's the notion that, DEI represents change. And you've got to go acknowledge some of your personal biases, but also some of the things that do not work towards equity, diversity, and inclusion in your company. And it's not a comfortable things to address, particularly if your company is not diverse to start with, is not promoting equity, and it's been years of that, and you're asking a leadership team to dramatically acknowledge some of their shortcomings and change them, and it does require efforts and courage, and not everybody wants to do it.
Wow, powerful answer. I think the role of cognitive dissonance must come into play here for a lot of these organizations. Robin, over to you. What are your thoughts about the hesitation?
Well, I think that Guillaume really hit it. I don't think it's an economic issue, but I do think it's a position issue. If you have people that are cemented in their positions within a company, especially management, it is very difficult to make change. Just general change, any change, even process change, it's tough. Mm-hmm. So you've got to, it's been easy for me because I've been an entrepreneur and I bring my view of the world to the company. And I've merged my companies over time. I've sold companies over time, and I've seen what happened afterwards, and I've seen what happened before. So it's kind of interesting, when you bring in a diverse culture and you bring it into a very homogeneous structure, it's difficult. If you bring it into a hierarchical structure that is not used to people having comments, it's tough. So I think it's just, I maybe phrase it this way. It's like evolution. And I know that if you look at the international education market globally, one of the big benefits it's had with international students coming from one country and going to another country is they actually educate each other. And those towns, those small villages, and I've seen this in Canada, I've seen it in the US, but I've also seen it in the Middle East. I've seen it in Africa, how the students exchange information. Those kids exchange information. And all of a sudden, everybody benefits from that. So, I think the evolutionary process has to apply to companies too. And they have to learn, because what's going to happen is the ones that do not adapt will die. Eventually they do. We see it. They're not being inclusive. But I also think you have to be careful about not going and running at something and saying, okay, we're going to do everything, because you're going to fail.
That's right.
You will just fall off a cliff. So you better have some planning. You better have some knowledge. You have to have some end goal in mind that you want to do.
Thank you. And I think Don hit on that earlier as well, just being mindful, being thoughtful, and planning with intention. I think, Guillaume, you also mentioned that the intention is so critical to any organization that's looking to adopt DEI. Next question I want to ask is about the pandemic. What role do you think the pandemic played in the DEI movement? And if it did, in what ways? Robin.
Wow. Okay. So I've got a couple of big things, but I'll say them quickly. It's affected the world in a bad way. And it's not because of the medical or health issues. It's created populism. And it's emboldened populism globally. And it's created more of a divide. So in one aspect, that's happened because people were locked down in their country, in their city, in their home. And there was fear in the governments, the organizations that protect us. That created a problem globally that we're faced with today. So that, I think, has been very harmful. And it's also harmed individuals psychologically. When we're talking about students again, I've seen students in bachelor apartments going through post-secondary degrees and just going over the deep end. Parents not knowing what to do with them. They can't leave. They're stuck. On the other hand, though, I have seen it create an opportunity for people to ask why. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why is the community like this? So if you remember, you had situations like Black Lives Matter. You had organizations get upset. You had people say that we can define ourselves differently. And that's all happened dramatically in the last 3 years because people ask. And then you had the great, firing, running out, leaving companies, walking away because people were saying, why am I doing this? So it's interesting. We've had two different big things happen, I think, because of the pandemic. And one of the worst things I hope doesn't happen, but we have a human amnesia that happens. We tend to go through big events, then we forget about them. I think we got to learn from this one because it's not going to be the last one. So it might be really beneficial. And I think that mental health has really appeared as a preeminent issue for our existence. We have to be able to understand what's going on and be able to nurture those around us. And I think the human contact is very important. And I think the pandemic really caused suffering there.
Agreed. And we certainly saw that in our industry. Again, one of the reasons I'm proud to work where I do is we simply help people. And that's a pretty good thing to be able to say at the end of your working day. Don, same question to you. You must have seen a lot of impact from the pandemic and as we've emerged from the pandemic. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple things. One, to echo the point on mental health is the pandemic forced a slowdown for all of us to kind of reflect on who we are, why we exist, and what matters to us. And that led to the Great Resignation. That led to people determining the type of work, the amount of work. And it was a very defining period where individuals kind of took some power back, right, from the corporation. And so what's now occurring is that, back to another question of why are people resistant to DEI, is because leaders were used to leading one way, the world changed around them, and now every employee is expecting a personalized work experience. And leaders have to adapt at the ways that you can do that at scale. And that's difficult, right? And so that's a conundrum. The pandemic also exposed our distrust in enterprise systems, right? If you think about the distrust in government, the distrust in science, distrust in our political leaders, because as everyone was slowing down, it's like, now who do you believe, right? In the US and in the world globally, we had this mask versus no mask, right? This simple piece of cloth, right, became this political thing, this religious thing, all of these things versus, should I do this simple thing no matter what, if it has even 5% chance of keeping more and more people safe? And so this collide between personal expectation and community and what's right for all of us is now at an impasse. And I think it's something that we're still struggling today as we rebuild trust in institutions. And it's not helping where our political systems across the globe are feeding the narrative, right, that we are more different than we are together. And so now what's happening, because we're all used to Zoom and all of these digital systems and all of this information coming at us, it's really about the pandemic has confused who do we trust. And that's the biggest, I think, negative impact that I think's occurred over the last several years, is a real degradation of trust in systems.
Thank you, Don. Guillaume, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I'm no expert, and I think it's still too early probably to fully grasp how this will impact many things. So I'll just take a very narrow lens, which is more like in leadership and management. I mean, one thing that came out of COVID is really that acceleration of remote working, and to some extent, I think it's really helped open pools of candidates and seek and achieve even greater diversity in the staff that we can tap into, and so on that front, it's a positive. What it's made really challenging, though, is the managerial practices to really. We talked about the fact that DEI is a lot about not only the talk, but walking and showing certain behaviors, and it's harder for managerial for leadership to really inspire and encourage people in a remote working environment to do that. So I think that's been one of the challenge. Another challenge I would say is as people have the opportunity to live more and more in their bubble, I'm still struggling a little bit with that one is, are they less exposed today than they were yesterday to different walks of life and different colleagues that are different, or are they kind of within their bubble? And so that part is, I see a lot of positive aspects, but at the same time, I find that when we talk about that inclusion aspect and that exposure to different perspective, we may have to reinvent how we function together in a more remote environment. So I'm not answering your questions as much as asking questions myself about how it will impact us.
Thank you. No, I mean, sometimes the best answers are found by asking more questions. So I appreciate the candor. Last question that we're going to deal with today. And I think the previous question proved a nice jumping off point. As we look ahead, how do you see DEI evolving within organizations over time? Robin?
Well, I think it's a natural progression. It has to be. And I like what Guillaume just mentioned too, because that's one of the things is having the remoteness is the same with having this populism because you're in your own environment and you're not sharing. Digitalization and technology have been great for us, but it's also exacerbated a lot of these issues right now because of it. I think that companies will have to adapt. They're trying, especially big companies are trying. But I think it's difficult for them to especially do this internationally and to do this at scale, which has been mentioned before. I think it's difficult. They have to build in an idea and a feeling of educating all of the managers, all of the people within the business. I think that's going to be something important. So it's inevitable. It's going to happen. I think the processes have to get better. And I like what Don's been talking about because he's really got it down to a system. And I like that.
Thank you, Robin. Guillaume, over to you.
Well, I think like if you look at the reality, more and more companies are starting DEI initiatives, are hiring DEI managers to implement those initiatives. So I think the train has left the station, and it's definitely gonna progress, and DEI in itself is becoming like a key part of HR department in most companies' focus. But I would say for me, clearly when you see, I see my kids, and I was asking them actually, and they're still at an age where they're not in the workforce, but will be tomorrow. And I was asking them like, would that matter to you to join a company that is diverse and has DEI initiative that are communicated? And they were saying, absolutely, but it's got to be authentic. It's got to be part of what the company is. And so I think we still probably in a phase where for some companies, it's a little bit of a checklist exercise. And I think it's going to but we won't have a choice to become central to the DNA of any organization that want to attract the future talents, retain them, and perform. So I'm very confident in the future of DEI being part of the core values of most companies going forward.
Thank you, Guillaume. Last word on today's podcast to you, Don.
Oh, I appreciate it. And I'll be brief. I'm harking back to what Guillaume said earlier about successful companies have highly engaged workforces. And I think that we have to use more universal language and then underpin DEI as a way to get there, right? And that's something that I think is super important in terms of DEI evolving in the workplace, because there's so much noise about DEI is now just a race discussion. Well, what about generation? What about gender? Right? So we have to use language that the audience can receive so that we then can develop momentum and then the measurement, and then we'll be able to get going. And so whether it is well-being at work, which is the title of this podcast, right? Engaging workforce. We have to use phrases where we can get a high degree of unity at the outset, leadership development, and then we layer diversity, equity, inclusion as a feature function of how to make those things come true. And those are the things that I think will allow us to accelerate DEI in the coming years.
Gentlemen, I count myself lucky to have moderated such an interesting, diverse, insightful group. And I want to thank you all for sharing your time, your insights and experience with us today. I know I'm certainly better off for it, and I know that our listeners will be as well. So once again, thank you, and I wish you all the best in your day and the rest of the summer. Take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was super fun, and I've got a page full of notes.
Thank you, Rob.
Our pleasure.